Nick, welcome to the show, or Chewy, as I see one of your nicknames is.
That's what most people know me as. Yeah, in the jiu-jitsu community, people know me as Chewy.
Right on, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on to the show. You know, we do live calls, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. You have a YouTube channel called Chewjitsu.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So how long have you been doing that for?
I started training fresh out of high school back in 2003. So I started like I was graduating high school and started training jiu-jitsu right after wrestling.
What was the spark that got you into this as intense as you are now? What was the major shift for you to take it seriously?
Well, it's like one of those things, right? You're drawn towards something. Sometimes there's like the superficial reason that you're chasing, and then there's deep underlying stuff going on. So the sort of the front end reason was that I wanted to fight mixed martial arts. And so, I wrestled, and so I was like, well, I need to learn how to do the, finish on the ground. And so I wanted to keep competing and I wanted to fight. So that was that. And then the other thing that I didn't really realize until much later was that in wrestling, right, it was the only time as a high schooler I sort of felt like I belonged because, like, it was this place where we had all the different kids, the nerdy kids, the cool kids, everybody was coming in, beating the snot out of each other, and it formed a brotherhood within that made us very close knit. And then when wrestling wasn't in season, I felt sort of depressed because I missed it. And then when I got into jiu-jitsu, it's like, oh, it's this thing again. It's this, we're beating the crap out of each other, but there's this mutual respect and this bond that we share. And so I really, even more so as I got older and older and realized how hard it was to find those kinds of places, really relished that part of it.
Yeah, I hear that from a lot of guys, but I also have seen it again and again where you form that brotherhood and that family through that intense training. So yeah. It sparks for a lot of guys. And do you run an academy?
I do, yeah.
You do, and you're out of Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky, yeah.
Louisville, nice.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of training out there. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. And obviously, we're really focusing in on this episode with tactical fitness. And of course, when you do this type of profession or you teach or coach, you realize how applicable and necessary it is. So what dangerous question did you want to bring to the table today?
Well, so my thing is like your experience, right? So with you, have you done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before? Okay. And how long have you been training in it?
I mean, my whole career, since really 2001. So I was a white belt for a really, really, really long time because it wasn't about the rank for us. We're doing it, in the teams, and it's not like we're focusing on leveling up. We're not doing it in a very traditional sense. But I would say I've been rolling for 20 plus years at this point.
Okay. So I guess maybe it's a different kind of question, but the thing that always interests me. So like when I get people from different walks of life coming into the gym, and people that have been training for different reasons, one of the things that I always find interesting is to hear their perspective into how training's affected them or what they've taken from it, right? Because everybody, like I said, comes in for different reasons, or sometimes similar reasons, but what we take out of it is completely different. And then for you, like having the experience that you have with, the military and things like that, what are some things that either the training itself, the fighting itself, or otherwise have you taken from jiu-jitsu?
Well, even from an earlier perspective, before I even got into the military, when I was younger, martial arts were something that I knew were necessary. I knew you needed to be able to defend yourself. And that was the exploration of like, well, what's the best one out there? And that's, of course, when UFC, 1 and 2 and 3 came to fruition and everybody realized right away, like, what's this jiu-jitsu thing? Of course, it took on a whole new shape after that. But it was almost undeniable to know that jiu-jitsu and that ground game, that grappling game was an essential part of the combative element. And I think I've always carried that through. So going into the military and then seeing it firsthand, if you can't control a guy or you can't cuff a guy or you end up on the ground, it was very real to me to know that if I have to face 5 dudes and I end up in a situation where I'm in the street and I'm on the ground, I've got to be able to get back to my feet effectively or be able to manipulate that guy and have some level of control. And without Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you saw the wrestlers that had a wrestling background, they would keep up, but they wouldn't be able to close the deal in a combative environment like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner could. And that was what gained my respect very, very earlier in my career. And when I showed up to SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast, I ended up going to Lynx Academy, which Frank Cucci, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that name, but Frank Cucci, identified a lot of these needs in the standpoint of like, how do we put cuffing, ground game, and combatives all in one place? And I always knew that, you couldn't necessarily in a combative environment just isolate, but I knew the need to be able to increase those skills was to get on the mat more. So I would say that was kind of the base foundation of knowing that you couldn't look away from it. Once you saw Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can't now see the truth of it and then look away. And that's really what it was for me very, very early.
Now with that, because of your experience, right? Like Jiu-Jitsu is one of these things where there's a mixture of it that's incredibly real, incredibly functional, incredibly applicable. But there's also this function of it where, at a certain point, we're all just training in the gym and it's this enjoyable thing that we're having fun with that has a sporting element of it, right? There's a little bit of both there. My estimation is that a lot of times one of the most important things that we get is the ability to deal with stress, having someone really put pressure on us, things like that. Even if the move itself is not applicable to a fight, having someone try to squeeze your friggin' face off is very applicable, and it desensitizes you to that feeling. And if you've never felt that before, it's very it can be alarming to you the first time it happens. For you, with the experience that you've had, is there anything that you think that you've seen that's been applicable to situations outside of the gym? Or if there's anything that stands out to you that's like, this is super applicable, or this has been useful for me outside of the gym in relation to the techniques, because that's one of the arguments with jiu-jitsu sometimes these days is that, oh, it's too sporty, it's too this, but there's still so much of it that's very applicable to a real fight or a situation where you have to put hands on someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that first element that you talked about, the desensitization or the repetition that you're getting and being exposed to that level of intensity, that, yes, 100%. For me, when I started jiu-jitsu, it was very much like, oh, we're starting on our knees, we tap hands and we go. Right. And I knew right away that wasn't right. I knew, now would I still do it today? 100%. I'm not taking anything away from the validity of, starting in those positions. But anybody that doesn't have a combative background, they would come into the gym and be like, oh, this is how we fight. This is the reps that you're getting. But when I apply jiu-jitsu to a real world scenario, I understand that it helps me not get taken down. It helps me understand how to manipulate somebody else to take them down without falling on my face or falling on my back. Those are very, very, very useful things to do if I'm having to cuff somebody and I'm in full kit, or I'm on the street right now and I don't want to go to the concrete. That to me was something that was inseparable. I just talked about this on one of the videos, is that when I'm training right now, like if I were to roll with you today, I would never stop thinking about where I could headbutt, gouge, bite, roll, rip, like all those things. Anybody that rolls with me, they know that that's going to happen. And if I've never rolled with that person before, I'm not going to be super intense about it because like this guy's crazy. But I don't ever want to lose. I don't want to lose sight of like those are still all options for me. And when you combine the combative with the jiu-jitsu, you get a really, really solid product that's going to be effective in the street. So for me, all of the different submissions, as long as they weren't exposing me in an unnecessary way on my back or in any other element, they would be useful to be able to submit this guy and say, hey, I don't want to kill you, right? Rear naked choke, for example. I mean, I've used that probably more than anything that I can count, because I've been like, okay, this guy's a problem. I don't want to stick a blade in him and I don't want to shoot him, but he needs to go to sleep. I need to neutralize him. He needs to wake up in handcuffs. I mean, I've done that more times than I can count. So the application of how to get there, rear naked is great. We can say, hey, we want to get here all day long, but getting there is the path that real Brazilian technique and repetition and time on the mat helps you crawl to that position and not just think it's going to happen immediately when a guy's fighting for his life. So I think that's what's helped me really open my eyes from a sense of traditional jiu-jitsu, and really the style of it is like, to me, it's human chess. How do I move just a little bit more this way so that I can get a little bit more of an advantage? And in the midst of a battle, with gear or without gear, all of a sudden, whether I got stunned or clipped, somebody's grabbed me, I snap out of it and like, oh, look, I'm in the position that I'm at on the mat all the time. Now all I need to do is go under, grab, change positions, put my foot out, lay the guy down, and now we're right back where I want to be. So I think it's just changing positioning and also submissions that have helped me realize the invaluable nature of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
That reminds me of something. There's a really good black belt named Chris Howder, and he says something that's I really like the saying. It's something I resonate with, which is, you can roll sport, but you always think street. So you can roll and do all the sporty stuff you want to, but in the back of your mind, you should always kind of in your mind know what would be a good thing if I was in a fight versus not in a fight. And I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying, roll and roll however you want to, but always know, like, if this was a fight, what would we do? Which pathways would we want to get rid of?
I think for anybody listening to this too, really two different methods of thinking, right? Because if you're a good coach and they're there for self-defense, you have to be able to convey that message really well and clearly, especially if somebody's new and they don't know anything. They're relying on you to help save their life, as opposed to the guy that very specifically knows that you're going into a competition specifically for the technique of jiu-jitsu. I think anybody really underlyingly knows that they're there for some element of self-defense, but I think a good coach is going to help explain that right off the bat. Like, hey, look, just because we're starting from our knees, don't miss the point. You don't do this on the concrete, And you don't want to say that in every single move. But when you're raising somebody up and you've known somebody for years that really says, hey, look, Chewy, I'm really worried. I was in this situation the other day. I was afraid for my life. Help me with this. We're not doing them any service by just saying, hey, get on the mat, and just do these moves because you want to submit somebody. It's got to be connected to reality.